Shout out to SneakyPig200 for supporting me on level 3 of Patreon. Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. There's not much I need to say about it. We all know it, we all love it. We're halfway through this DLC, which was first released all the way back in February last year, and we've received 24 new tracks already, with another 24 arriving in 2023. Waves 1 to 3 have been an amazing time, and chances are that waves 4 to 6 will be just as great, if not maybe even better, as we do have a faint idea of what the tracks could be, thanks to the prefix leak, where data miners were able to figure out which console prefix each track was associated with. And we know this leak to be reliable because all of the console prefixes lined up perfectly for Wave 2. And while they didn't line up 100% with Wave 3, it was very close, and it doesn't really disprove the leak, as data miners were also able to gather music prefetches of upcoming tracks when Wave 2 released, including all of Wave 3's tracks, and what do you know, they sounded identical to the songs in the final release, and their file names were ordered after the prefix leak. So even though the developers may have slightly jumbled up the course order, it's safe to assume they've already decided on what tracks to bring back, so they can work on them beforehand. Which has led to an interesting consistency, according to the prefix leak at least. The N64 and 3DS courses are simply done for. Meanwhile, there are no GameCube tracks yet, while Mario Kart Super Circuit, Wii and Tour will have the most courses in the DLC. It's definitely interesting how differently they've prioritized the amount of courses per game. Like, okay, obviously they'd be much more light on the SNES courses since they're visually and gameplay wise pretty generic. But then you get Mario Kart DS's course selection in the Boost Course Pass. I mean, I understand why N64 and 3DS courses got shafted since we already have a lot of them in the base game. And Mario Kart Wii has a lot of fan favorite courses, so of course they want to cash in on that nostalgia. But what happened to Mario Kart DS here? This is probably the most interesting yet bizarre course selection in the Booster Course Pass. Mario Kart DS, like Mario Kart Wii, is a fan favorite Mario Kart in many people's eyes. In fact, I'd say it's one of the most revered titles in the entire series, and it's not like it already had many tracks in the base game either. Just like Wii, it has so many fan favorite courses, but we probably might not see them, because we will only be getting 4 Mario Kart DS courses in total for the Booster Course Pass, 3 of which are already out, like Shroom Ridge and Peach Gardens. Yeah, the only fan favorite track we do have in the Booster Course Pass from this game is Luigi Pinball. And even in the base game, the only fan favorite is Tick-Tock Clock, with the other two being Wario Stadium and Cheep Cheep Beach. And now, we only have one DS track left, according to the prefix leak, the third track of the Fruit Cup in particular, and the big question is, which one will it be? There are bound to be riots, as no matter what, there will be a fan favorite left out. And since this is such a discussed topic, I thought, let's try to narrow it down. Which one of the 10 courses not in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe already will be the one to close off the DS roster? In order to maximize our chances of being right, we must first know how will we narrow down these courses, from unlikely to most likely. Well, there are 2 factors which I'm taking into consideration. What courses are or will be in Mario Kart Tour, and where the developers put this DS course in the prefix leak. As I already said in my video about predicting Mario Kart Double Dash courses, it should be obvious at this point that all of the remakes we see in the DLC are really just enhanced versions of Mario Kart Tour remakes, which becomes quite easily noticeable sometimes. So which DS courses do we have in Mario Kart Tour? Those are Luigi's Mansion, Waluigi Pinball, DK Pass, Airship Fortress and Peach Gardens, 2 of which are already in the Booster Course Pass. For upcoming tracks, it's a bit more tricky, but we know of at least 2. The first one is Shroom Ridge. Its inclusion in the Booster Course Pass makes it obvious, as it's also perhaps the most stereotypically tour-looking track of the bunch. The second track, however, we've narrowed down through one lone asset, titled Pakun Flower Fire. Pakun is the Japanese name for piranha plant, and fire implies a fire piranha plant. So far, there is only one course which has this type of hazard, DS Mario Circuit. Of course, it's a pretty basic hazard. There is the risk of this asset being used for another track, like when people datamined conveyor assets and thought we'd get Toad's Factory, but it ended up being for Singapore Speedway 2 instead. So we can't be fully sure, but we'll assume it's for Mario Circuit. It wouldn't really fit in any city track, and in the case of original Tour Nitros, assets typically always have the file name of the track they appear in their names as well, most of the time. And those are the upcoming tracks we know of. They could very well work on a track which we just don't know about yet. I mean, if Luigi wasn't in the DLC already, or on the banner, there would be no way to know if we'll even get it, because it has no assets Datamined. But either way, these courses will still have a head start, in my predictions. And we will also be taking into consideration where the developers put the DS track in the prefix leak. Now, as we saw with Wave 3, they can decide to jumble around the courses afterwards if they feel like, but it's still safe to assume they have already figured out what courses they want to bring back, so they can work on them beforehand. And in that case, I still think it's likely that they put the courses where they thought they'd fit. This particular DS course, like I said, happens to be the third one in the Fruit Cup. The Fruit Cup, which is the first cup of not just a new row, but also of 2023, which would point towards this track probably not being all too challenging or chaotic. So with all that being said, let's start plucking off these courses, like petals of a flower, and see which one will be spared. And I already know one track to have an impossible chance of making it to the booster course pass, namely Rainbow Road. It doesn't even matter that it's not been datamined in Tour. Wave 4 will probably take a step back in difficulty and chaos, since it opens up a new row of cups, which has in the past always meant taking it easier. And even if Wave 4 was an exception, we already had Rainbow Road last wave, and this final DS track spot isn't even a fourth track. I rest my case. I can guarantee we won't be seeing this track. Every other course has a slightly higher chance. In the unlikely tier, we have 4 courses which don't necessarily have an impossible chance of making it in, but I would be incredibly surprised if they did. First off, Bowser Castle. Like Rainbow Road, it would be too difficult and too chaotic for the Fruit Cup. It's slightly more likely than Rainbow Road because we don't have a retro Bowser Castle track in Mario Kart 8 at all yet. But it's as much of a difference with Rainbow Road in likelihood as saying that Yoshi Falls in Mario Kart Wii is better than the original. And speaking of which, Yoshi Falls is probably not coming either. Actually, I'm gonna lump this one together with Desert Hills and DK Pass here, because I have largely the same reasons as to why I doubt they'll reappear. All 3 would clash with tracks already in the game. Desert Hills would clash with GC and Dry Desert to start off with. Actually, that's an understatement. Aesthetically and gameplay-wise, they are almost the same. The difference is that Desert Hills is also much shorter and simpler than Dry Desert, so there would be no reason to bring it back at all, especially not because it's unfortunately one of the most hated courses of all time. So if we saw this track return, I'd have to rethink my life. Now Yoshi Falls and DK Pass might not seem like they'd conflict with any tracks, but they would in the future, because there are 2 courses which we are certain will arrive in the Booster Course Pass. One is Wii DK Snowboard Cross. This is because it's included in an alternate Booster Course Pass banner, which was found in the game's files by data miners. The other one is a Nitro Yoshi themed course, which we know of thanks to names of assets datamined alongside it for Mario Kart Tour. Oh yeah, did I also mention that taking a bunch of other factors into consideration, it's very much likely that both of these 2 courses would end up in the Fruit Cup, going by the prefix leak. So no matter which of these 2 DS courses you'd put there, they'd both conflict with not just one course in the DLC already, but even in the same cup. It speaks for itself, and those were all of the courses I don't think will make it at all. That leaves us with 5 remaining tracks. Figure 8 Circuit, Luigi's Mansion, Delfino Square, Mario Circuit, and Airship Fortress. Each of these tracks have a viable reason for ending up being the final DS track, and I wouldn't end up being surprised if any of them ended up coming to the DLC, whether it's fan favorite potential, distinctiveness, or maybe something completely else. However, there are still 3 tracks here which I wouldn't be too sure about, and we'll go to the neutral tier. First up is Figure 8 Circuit. Wave 4 might definitely take a step back in difficulty from 3, but does that mean they'd stoop so far down they'd pick the easiest track with no value, no hazards, no nothing? Wave 4 might be the start of a new row, but it's still Wave 4, not Wave 1. They could pick it based on the fact that it's, Mario Kart 8 and they want to finish off the DS selection in an ironic kind of way, but I think Nintendo is wiser than this. Another track I'm neutral on is, bear with me, Delfino Square. Yeah, this is gonna sound hypocritical, seeing as in my Wave 4 to 6 prediction video, I actually thought this track would be the final DS course. Next up, I believe we will be seeing the final DS track of the entire Booster Course Pass, Delfino Square in particular. Overall, I do think that video has aged well, except for this one choice. What were I thinking? It is a fan favorite, perhaps one of the most revered DS courses of all time, and it's also pretty easygoing, which would fit Wave 4 incredibly well in my opinion. There's only one problem though. It's a town. This is the same reason I don't think we'll see Mushroom City make an appearance in the Boosted Course Pass. Every cup in the Boosted Course Pass has started out with a real-life city track so far, and it will continue to be the case most likely. So why would we also have a city-ish track that's not based on a real city? It would just stick out in an incredibly odd way. You might think it's no big deal, I mean, it's aesthetically different compared to most city tracks. Sure, but not to Amsterdam Drift. And Amsterdam Drift has been datamined to be the city track for the Fruit Cup, according to the music leak. Which is, you know, where this DS track happens to be. I mean, most people even thought this was Delfino Square when it was just Amsterdam Drift. And that's not even mentioning how Delfino Square hasn't been datamined to come to Mario Kart Tour yet. I'm sorry Delfino Square fans, but I want to see this track too, but we'll probably won't. There is one more DS track I'm slightly hesitant on putting as likely, which is DS Luigi's Mansion. So this one I predicted to be the final DS track back in my Wave 3 to 6 predictions. Do I even have any credibility left? Now this does seem very likely. It's another fan favorite, and unlike Delfino Square, it doesn't conflict with any existing tracks, with its haunted green forest. Even compared to the other ghost tracks in Mario Kart 8, it's really distinct. And it's not particularly difficult either. What sinks its possibility is the music. For the longest time, Mario Kart 8 was the only Mario Kart game with no music repeats between tracks. Even though Mario Kart Stadium and Mario Kart Circuit effectively had the same song and melody, the developers still made sure they were different songs by changing instruments and atmosphere. This was the case until they added Waluigi Pinball in Wave 2, which had the exact same song used in DS Wario Stadium, which was already in the base game. Okay, fair enough, it still kinda fits, but I guess they just don't want to make new remixes anymore if they don't have to. As it turns out, Luigi's Mansion also has its theme in the base game already, in the battle stage with the same name. However, unlike the Wario Stadium situation, it's not quite the same song. It's in a weird limbo state where it still has the main melody, but the quality and progression has changed so much it wouldn't fit the racetrack anymore. It seems like they don't want to remix core songs anymore for Mario Kart 8 if they technically already have a remix. And since this remix doesn't fit Luigi's Mansion anymore, I don't see them giving us this track back. In fact, this might even be the same reason as to why we haven't gotten the 3DS Woohoo tracks in the Boosted Course Pass. So yeah. And that only leaves us with two courses left, Mario Circuit and Airship Fortress. So which one will it be? Each of them have their own equally valid reasons as to why they should and shouldn't be the final DS track. They're both in Mario Kart Tour or will arrive to it at a later date. One is more simple on the surface, while the other is as revered as all can be. But one is also more fitting thematically for Wave 4, while the other one doesn't quite nail the atmosphere for it. Let's start with Airship Fortress. Out of all the remaining DS tracks, this one is probably the most loved. In fact, at least 80% of all predictions I've seen put this track here. And I mean, it doesn't not make sense. It would make sense to end off the DS core selection with a banger, to leave a good last impression. However, while we do know this will be the last DS course, we probably weren't supposed to. We only know it will be the last one because Nintendo accidentally left the console prefixes up. What if they always intended for a completely different track? If we didn't have any idea about the prefixes, I don't think we'd see a lot of people predicting this track for Wave 4, let alone for the Fruit Cup. It's probably one of the most difficult Mario Kart DS tracks, with hazards as early as at the starting line. The atmosphere is also pretty edgy and dangerous. But hold on, let's take a look at Mario Circuit now. If you watched my GameCube course predictions for the Boost Course Pass, you know the main reason why I think we could get this, but there is actually more to it than just that. Wave 1 and 2 both had a circuit track each, which was pretty expected since they were early beginner waves. That's why Wave 3 had no circuits. However, I still think we could see one more circuit. I mean, Waves 4 to 6 will probably collectively be more ambitious and interesting than Waves 1 to 3, so there will probably not be nearly as many circuits. But this is still a new row, so I think we could very well see at least one more circuit. And in that case, why not go for one of the more ambitious circuit tracks in the series overall? DS Mario Circuit is much harder and more interesting design-wise, compared to a lot of other circuit tracks in the series. Some turns are actually quite a bit tighter, and there are quite a few more spots where you could fall off or fall victim to a hazard. In fact, it's the only Mario Circuit set in the Star Cup, excluding SNES Mario Circuit 4, the third track at that. And well, would you look at that, the Fruit Cup DS is also the third one. However, what would make it really likely is this thing, the castle. Throughout the track, you always see Peach's castle, but you can at no point enter it. It's either blocked off by water or some fences. Wait, fences? That reminds me, the city tracks in Mario Kart Tour have fences. They were removed in 8 Deluxe however, so you could drive on certain pathways during certain laps. Wait, Peach Gardens also had fences in Mario Kart Tour, and we all know what happened to it in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Wait, and that route actually always existed there, the same way this castle has always existed here. Was it always meant to be used in the future? I think you see where I'm going with this. What if, for lap 3 of this track, you'd take a ramp that sends you inside Peach's castle, end up at the other side, where there's usually a fence blocking, and do the course backwards? With all things considered, this would just make the most sense. Sure, Airship Fortress is a fan favorite, but aside from that, its placement in the Fruit Cup doesn't really make sense at all. It's very difficult and dark. Meanwhile, Mario Circuit would mark a transition between the more simplistic Wave 1, 2 and 3 to the more ambitious Waves 4, 5 and 6. It fits in Wave 4, both as a circuit due to Wave 4 opening up a new row, but also as a more creative and ambitious circuit because it's still the 4th wave and not the first one. That is why I personally predict DS Mario Circuit to be the final DS course in the Booster Course Pass. Of course, I still wouldn't rule out the possibility of Airship Fortress being it. Even if I don't think it's that fitting, the fact remains that it is a fan favorite. So take this prediction with a grain of salt. But I personally believe and hope we will be getting DS Mario circuits. Overall, those are my predictions on what is the last DS course in the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. But which track do you think we will be seeing? If you like this video then please make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel, as I talk about everything Mario related. With all of that being said, I am departing. Until next time.